Mrs. E used radio programming, television production, and written publications to influence many listeners and viewers. Her messages encourage family members to build a nurturing environment for healthy self-esteem. Gone but not forgotten. Dr. Margaret Elcock.
Be part of the Citizens Community Forum.
When we talk about witness protection in Trinidad and Tobago, do you have any concerns that we may still not have the proper kind of witness protection program?
Our witness protection program is not the best protection program. We have had complainants wanting protection to give information about a police officer because they fear for their life.
But Mr. Cummings, I think you hit the nail on the head a little while ago, because with the COVID and with the pandemic, it has caused a lot of institutions to tweak with the way you deal with business in a more efficient way.
Let's discuss the issues. Let's dialogue towards developing a deeper understanding, fostering an atmosphere of peace, all towards creating better, stronger families and communities. Right here on Isaac 98.1 FM, every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. The Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings. Good evening, I'm Stephen Cummings and welcome again to the Citizens Community Forum. Our objective is always to have an engaging, interactive and civil discourse on matters that are of community nature, social, national as well. And of course, we always like to have a constructive discussion, whether it be on health, politics, labor, what have you. The topics are wide-ranging. Our guests are persons who express views and opinions of their own, views which are not necessarily that of the FBN Network, the Citizens Community Forum, or that of the host. Now, while our discussion may at times be robust and even emotionally charged, we can always find common ground and learn from each other of the many views and perspectives. Now, Trinidad and Tobago, a year and a half on, is now faced with the economic stresses of a global pandemic. While the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed what some say has been the ugly underbelly of inequality and inequity in many sectors, there continues to be a call for a detailed plan for revitalization, a renewed mandate for social justice and people-centered development. The call also is about a shift in the rules of economic engagement that allow for greater citizens' participation and economic survival. From July 2020 to, or I should say March 2020 to July 2021, many may remark that this for them might be the end of the race to the bottom, especially for many businesses that were already on the fringe of economic and social collapse pre-pandemic and pre-COVID-19. This evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, our topic is Trinidad and Tobago Pathway to Economic Reopening and Recovery. And our focal points are in the next hour: vaccination, business reopening, future economic pathway, and of course, recovery. And to discuss the issues, joining me this evening inside the Citizens Community Forum, Mr. David Abdullah, former government senator and leader of the Movement for Social Justice. Also joining me is Mr. Martin George, attorney at law, president of the Tobago Business Chamber. And we, without further ado, we'd like to get right into the discussion. Mr. George, welcome again.
Thank you, and good evening to you, and good evening to David, and good evening to Trinidad and Tobago and all your listeners everywhere.
And of course, David, good evening to you once again.
Good evening, Stephen, and to Martin, of course, of all of your listeners. And let me just take the opportunity to publicly express my condolences to you and all the members of Isaac 98.1 and the broader network on the passing of your founder and inspirational leader, Dr. Margaret Elcock.
Yes, thank you, David. And I know Mr. George would also, express
those sentiments. Indeed.
Yes, those sentiments. Thank you both for remembering what some people say has been an inspirational leader, a trailblazer in terms of media and radio broadcasting. But maybe we'll have another program dedicated to that at another time. So, gentlemen, welcome. I want to sort of get into the program right away to sort of get some of the issues on the table. I want to start on the issue of vaccination. We heard of the Prime Minister announcing on Saturday that there's going to be a ramping up of this with 900,000 inoculation, with a 900,000 inoculation target. Mr. George, are you as lifted in your spirits now as the Prime Minister appeared to have been? I know that the Chamber has been calling for increased vaccination as a ticket out of the crisis for which we have found ourselves.
Well, the thing is, I mean, the statistics are there, the facts are there. If one looks at the latest statistics I saw coming out of the USA today, 99.5 of all COVID-related deaths in the US are now linked to unvaccinated persons. So it is clear that the vaccination is a way out of this pandemic, and it is clear that the vaccination can prevent unnecessary loss of life. So therefore, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we are coming late to the table and we are late in the dance. But if it is that we are really getting the 800,000 Sinopharm vaccines from China, and those are due in a week or two, then, praise be to God for that, seriously, because at the end of the day, we have to try and get up to speed. What I think is necessary for the government to look at also is the question of trying to mount a serious marketing and advertising campaign to ensure that we overcome vaccine hesitancy, vaccine resistance, and the outright anti-vaxxers who are there. Because the point is, you have so many of our soca artists, our social personalities who are out of work right now. You can use them. You can use them. Let them create little jingles, little songs, little clips on TV, radio, wherever, encouraging the population to get vaccinated, because you don't want that you end up with a whole lot of vaccines and there you have the population unwilling to take it. I'm not sure if people are aware of it, but some of the vaccine donations we got from some of our Caribbean neighbors were actually vaccines that their population refused to take. So while we were glad for the gift, we have to understand the extent of vaccine resistance and vaccine hesitancy. So we don't want Trinidad and Tobago to be in a position where we have a surplus of vaccines and a reluctance from the population to take it. Of course, we saw in the early days a surge in people wanting to get vaccinated. I hope that continues, but I still think there are quite a few people out there who have, they believe in the conspiracy theories. They do their research on Facebook or social media,
and YouTube,
instead of trusting the science.
Okay. All right. I hear you, Mr. George. And still on that point of vaccination, I know that the call has been from the Tobago Business Chamber to vaccinate, and you in particular. Let's focus on Tobago as a bubble. Is that still the call in respect to Tobago?
Of course it is. And I think if you're getting 800,000 vaccines from China, then, there's absolutely no excuse for not focusing on Tobago. Get Tobago fully vaccinated, get Tobago cleared so that Tobago can reopen fully. Because, while we are grateful for the Prime Minister saying that on 17th July, the borders will be reopened. As I've told people, it makes absolutely no sense to say your borders are reopened if you're thinking that is going to encourage a tourist to come here while you're still under a state of emergency, you're still under a curfew, your restaurants are not fully open for in-house dining, your bars are not open, your beaches are not open, your public spaces are not open for group activity in any big way. So therefore, in that case, it's just a farce to say that your borders are reopening and your country remains closed.
All right, so George, I'll come back to you shortly. Mr. Abdullah, as one who sat once in government and on many enterprise committees and with perhaps responsibility for shaping and setting policy, what would you say is needed now for a quick revitalization of business activity in Trinidad and Tobago? We have seen the ravages coming out of months of devastating economic shutdown.
Yes, and once again, good evening, and thank you for having me on your program, Stephen. believe that what the first and most important thing is that there is a proper process of consultation, dialogue, not just consultation, dialogue and engagement of all stakeholders and the sharing of information.
Yes.
In other words, different interests come to the table with a different perspective, they have a different agenda. So while some people are saying open everything up right away, given what is happening in the world today, and when we look around, Australia is locking down. South Korea is getting a new spike, and South Korea is touted as one of the most developed countries in terms of its approach to dealing with COVID at the start. That very few cases, very few deaths. Yeah. Japan has had an extended state of emergency just being imposed and so on. So all over the world, there are these problems that are happening as a result of the variants and people being affected by COVID variants that are more transmissible and in some cases more deadly.
Yes.
So I do believe that we need to have that engagement so that all interests can come to the table and be aware of the situation and work out how the economy should be phased in. The second part about it is that you need a clear plan for recovery, and we'll come to that perhaps a little bit later on. Because, as I said some days ago, we can't just build back better. We can't build back the existing system better, because the existing system that we had prior to COVID was not a good economic system. It had many structural problems. We were too dependent on oil and gas to earn foreign exchange. The economy, the way in which wealth and income is distributed was unequal. So we don't want to build that back better and reverse all of the problems that existed before. We have to engage in a transformative approach. And I'll come back to that because there's a very important quote from the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which came out just a few days ago on that particular issue. So we have to have a clear plan, a roadmap, and the problem is what happened to the government's roadmap for recovery. That was
I know that was going to come up in our discussion, but go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. And let me just say, as Martin spoke, the MSJ did a roadmap for recovery. And we also said, as he talked about utilizing our artists and so on, we said, let us use our creatives to get the messaging across, not only about washing hands and social distancing and so on, but the messaging across about the danger of this virus and what has to be done with respect, certainly now, to vaccinations. I agree with Martin on that 100%. We want that a year ago.
Okay, and David, I'll want to press you further. I know that there was the initiative of the round table that the MSJ has advanced, and you stressed that you didn't want to have a head table, but more so a round table where this would sort of encourage citizen and stakeholder participation. But I'll come back to that, and have you develop that point further. So George, just coming back to you, the Prime Minister on Saturday spoke of a shift in policy, and I'm not too clear if it was another thrust at moral nudging or swaying or suasion or possible hinting of a soon-to-come mandatory vaccination program by law when he spoke. And I want to sort of at this time go back to what they just to get a listen on what the Prime Minister said on Saturday, and he had his press conference, and we're going to just get a little listen to what he said relative to the vaccination program in Trinidad and Tobago. And after we've gotten a listen, I just want you, Mr. George, if you can comment on that. This is from the press conference.
The public policy has to shift. The government cannot isolate or take it upon itself to isolate individuals in this country. If the individuals in a situation of vaccination by volunteerism, if such a person decides, I will take a chance on the virus and not take it on the vaccine, that is the individual choice that you are making. That is not a government choice. Today, I want to declare that notwithstanding all the abuse and the misinformation and the misunderstanding, the government of Trinidad and Tobago today has done what the government set out to do, which is to provide the population with the vaccines that are required. And the population is now required to use those vaccines to protect itself on an individual basis.
Mr. George, your interpretation, is that a hint of soon to come mandatory vaccination? Because he's talking about a shift in public policy with regard to health.
Well, I think it's a cry for the nation to heed the call to vaccination. Mm-hmm. I doubt very much that the government is going to venture so far into the realm of trying to make the vaccinations mandatory. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say so is because I have heard, I think, from the Attorney General that he has stepped very gingerly around that issue, because it is a flashpoint.
Yes.
It is a flashpoint, because I can guarantee you the minute the government decides to try to do that, you are going to see lots of lawsuits coming. You're going to see people filing constitutional motions. They're going to be filing applications for judicial review of any such decision. So it is something that you always have to approach with the greatest of care and discipline.
Sensitivity, yes.
But on the other hand, I say we have to bear in mind that in certain circumstances, the flexibility to impose such is there. Because if we think back, and this is a point that lots of people miss, if you look under the Education Act, under our Education Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and that's why I always like us to have recourse to the law and what the law says. Yes. Under our Education Act of Trinidad and Tobago, there are specifications which speak about children having to be inoculated against certain diseases in order to be able to attend school. So, I mean, while they are not telling you it's mandatory that you have to get the vaccination, they're saying, look, you must have it in order to be admitted into the school. And then remember, there's another part in the Education Act which says that any child of school age who is, able to do so and ought to be in school. So if you understand me, you put the two together and essentially it's basically mandatory inoculation as a child. So therefore, in those circumstances, we have to bear in mind that it is possible for the government to decide if it is that, it really gets exasperated and frustrated in terms of the resistance of the population to being vaccinated. The government has that as an option. But as I say, it is going to be really, for some persons, that is going to even harden their resistance to it. If it is that they feel like you're trying to force this down their throats. So the point is, I always prefer in such a circumstance the gentle persuasion, which is why I've said that we need to use the media, use even social media, use our marketing tools, use our advertising tools, use our communication tools to get that message across. You have persons like Barack Obama, Michelle Obama doing ads all across the US, trying to get people to be vaccinated, because remember, through the Republican CPAC and their caucuses, they have an underground message of anti-vaccination, which
there's a very strong movement.
President Trump, who ironically himself and his family are vaccinated, but the message they're putting out there, to people is, the vaccine resistance. Because in fact, this weekend they had a big rally, a big CPAC rally, and they were cheering the fact that there were low vaccination rates in some states. I mean, imagine the extent of this stupidity. They are cheering and applauding the fact that there are low vaccination rates in some states. So the point is, you have all kinds of persons getting that message out there. You also have Ice-T. You have all the major stars who are on board with it. And that's why I'm saying the government of Trinidad and Tobago needs to do the same. We have big soca stars. We have radio personalities such as yourself, whom they could use, popular persons such as David Abdullah, these are persons they can use to get.
And Martin George. Tony Martin George. All right, Dave. Let me bring David back in here. David, I want you to develop further on the issue of the round table that I referenced, because we are talking. You were talking a pathway towards economic recovery and where we go from here. And I know that the MSJ has been advancing this initiative, and I as I said, all sectors, all hands on deck, and the idea is really to have not just a talk shop, as it were, but to have an implementation strategy going forward to ease us out of where we are at the moment. David.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. And just for the record, yes, I have had 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine.
That's good. Yes.
I did say publicly that, some time ago that once it became available, I would take the vaccine.
So there's no hesitancy on your part, yes.
I had absolutely no hesitancy. And I could say that my parents, both of whom are in their mid-90s, and they have both been vaccinated as well. Mm-hmm. So, we have no hesitancy at all. And in a week's time, I would have gone to the 2 weeks after the second jab, and therefore I would be, quote unquote, fully vaccinated. So for the record, yes, I'd be quite prepared to encourage people to be vaccinated, based upon purely the science. Mm-hmm. So coming back to the issue, we are in a deeply polarized society, Stephen. And unfortunately, our parliamentary leaders have not set the best example for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of coming together to demonstrate a common fight, not just against the health pandemic in order to save lives and so on, but to have national consensus on the best way forward for dealing with the economic and the social fallout. Mm-hmm. And in the last few weeks, we have seen all the stories in the media, and I'm sure your listenership is well aware, given that they're faith-based, many of them, of the social fallout of the pandemic. Yes. In terms of poverty and people without jobs and without income and just not able to meet the basic needs of themselves and their families. Mm-hmm. So how do we address that? We can't address that by gallery, by showing off, well, we did this or we did that or we did more than the other person, or by abusing and attacking and so on.
So that there's no need for political posturing. There's no need for the gamesmanship and the political, the rhetoric. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not at all. And so in the context of the parliamentary leaders not demonstrating that type of leadership approach, we made the call for a roundtable, and it was really a 2-part proposal. The roundtable was going to be the political part, where the Prime Minister, leader of the opposition, would sit as co-chairs of the roundtable. They would each be joined by 2 members of their parliamentary teams, and then they'll be joined by 2 representatives from each of the parties in the Tobago House of Assembly, because we're trying to create a balance. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is that the THA was 6-6, as Martin well knows, right? So there was an automatic balance there. Yes. You couldn't say that one had the advantage over the other.
Over the other, yes.
And then one representative from each of the 14 regional corporations, municipal bodies, and so on. And incidentally, those split 7-7 between the PNM and the UNC in Trinidad. Yes. So again, there'll be a balance. And then that roundtable would then work out the basis and the terms of reference for convening a National Assembly. Mm-hmm. And in the National Assembly, chaired again by the PM leader of the opposition, co-chaired, and the members of the roundtable will be part of that. But in the National Assembly, we would then have representatives of civil society. Yes. So that you would have Mr. George or his nominee, the other representative of the Tobago business organizations. Mm-hmm. You'd have representatives of the business organizations in Trinidad, of labor, of women and youth, of our cultural and creative organizations, of our sporting organizations, faith-based organizations. So when you look at that National Assembly, you would see really reflected there Trinidad and Tobago. Mm-hmm. And that is where now the decision-making about what are the best mechanisms for getting recovery and transformation of the economy. Yes. Mm-hmm. What are the best mechanisms for dealing with the social fallout? Right. That is where those discussions. So at the end of the day, everybody could say, if it is a bad plan, it is a bad plan because all the key stakeholders agree to a bad plan. But nobody could accuse the other of
not wanting to try
a bad plan.
Yes, not
and
wanting to try.
Of foisting a bad plan on top of that.
Okay, yes. All right. Mr. George, you're free to respond to David in terms of his view and his perspective. But I also want to from a legal viewpoint, and I'm sort of pressing on you on that in that particular vein. I've heard of people who have talked about lawsuits and what they call class action suits. Now, I'm not a legal mind, so you'll have to sort of guide me through this. Is that a reality? Do you see that is a possibility? Because there are groups and pockets of the society who are at variance, seriously so, against all that is happening in terms of the management of the economy, infringement. Some people believe that their personal rights and this whole business of the right to self-determination is being infringed somewhere, and maybe at some point that that they may want to go in that direction. Should we be concerned about such utterances, or is it just smoke, as it were?
Well, the thing is, okay, let's just be clear. In Trinidad and Tobago, we don't really have the legal framework for class action lawsuits as there are in other countries. What we can have is a representative type action, which is slightly different.
Okay.
But separate and apart from that, there can be persons who may feel that, look, my individual constitutional rights have been, infringed, and they may bring an action. So it may be a group of persons, and they come together as a category, right? We saw that, for instance, in the CLICO lawsuits and stuff like that, the collapse of CL Financial, right? Where groups of persons got together and they, filed lawsuits in that regard. But what you would normally have is just one person as a nominee on behalf of all the others. So that's how we do it in Trinidad and Tobago. But the point is that, listen, let's look at it. In terms of the issue of the closure of the borders, there have been lawsuits. Persons have filed constitutional motions. They've said that this is a denial of their freedom of movement, etc., etc.
Yes.
Those have been struck down by the High Court. They've been struck down by the Court of Appeal. So far, I don't think anybody has yet approached the Privy Council on it. But at this point, those have been declared to be valid and legal laws and orders made by the government in those circumstances. So while you may have persons who, I guess, may be upset or maybe feel aggrieved, I mean, even, for instance, the state of emergency, there are persons who may not be happy with it, but at the end of the day, the Constitution does provide for it. The basis for it has been set out because, if you recall, the president, by her declaration, declared that there was a state of public health emergency, and in the circumstances, based upon the government's recommendation, she, made the proclamation. So therefore, we have to understand that, look, while there may be inconveniences and, certain things that you're not happy with, the law at the end of the day is what guides us. Okay, because Section 8 of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, that gives the president the power to declare a state of public emergency, right? And that is the section that she relied on, and she made the declaration accordingly based upon the recommendation of the government. She said, I am satisfied that a public emergency has arisen as a result of the outbreak of an infectious disease, the 2019 novel coronavirus, and a state of public emergency exists in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. So these things are things that, as I say, may have persons aggrieved and they may be upset. But in terms of mounting a successful legal challenge, it is always difficult, when you come down to brass tacks in such a scenario.
Okay.
So if it is that persons feel that, look, for whatever reason, they feel that their rights or their feelings or their, they may be upset or hurt or aggrieved, then of course the courts are always there. But thus far, I can tell you,
and people like yourselves, I suppose.
Sorry,
people like yourselves are available, I suppose, to treat with
an
equitable.
One doesn't file, lawsuits frivolously if it is that you've seen that, look, there appears to be little chance of success.
Okay,
and that seems to be what the courts are saying.
All right. All right, and of course, you are listening to and you're viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. This evening, I have with me Mr. Martin George, Attorney at Law, President of the Tobago Business Chamber, and we also have Mr. David Abdullah, former government senator and leader of the Movement for Social Justice. Our topic this evening is Trinidad and Tobago. pathway to economic reopening and recovery. What we will do at this time, gentlemen, we will take a short break and we come right back. And David, when we come back, I would allow you to open up the second and final half hour as we continue our discussion. So we want to just indicate to our listeners and our viewers to stay tuned. We'll be right back. Prime Minister, good evening to you and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening, my brother, and your viewers, listeners. I'm happy to be here with you.
Mr. Cummings, I think Trinidad has to be proud of this civilian oversight.
Mr. Cummings, you were asking about our operational, you asking about it from an operational standpoint.
First of all, good evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on your program. A very good evening to all of your listeners.
Every Wednesday, join our 1-hour current affairs program, the Citizens Community Forum. Topics are wide-ranging and echoes opinions and voices of our society, whether it be leadership, governance, health, crime, politics, or social issues. We can all have a civil and constructive discussion inside the Citizens Community Forum every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. on Isaac 98.1 FM with Stephen Cummings.
Last week when I heard that there were 16 children sleeping in the cell in a police station, that was something that was unacceptable to me.
The current constitution of the Public Services Association, there have been concerns about how the constitution...
If you are restructuring the PSA, the only way you can restructure the PSA itself is through constitutional reform.
If the minister does not accept our request and revalidate his license, we'll have to be heading to court.
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings. And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings with you, and I have with me Mr. Martin George, Attorney at Law, President of the Tobago Business Chamber, also Mr. David Abdullah, former government senator and leader of the Movement for Social Justice. And this evening, inside the Citizens Community Forum, we are talking recovery, we are talking vaccination, we are talking a pathway to economic recovery for Trinidad and Tobago. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yes, David, before we went to the break, I did indicate that I wanted to have you open the second half hour of our discussion. Looking at Trinidad and Tobago on, an economic, if you have to look at the economics of Trinidad and Tobago, are you able to say that we can really, give an indication of the impact of what the COVID-19 pandemic has done to our economy? We can talk about GDP, we can talk about imports, exports, we can talk about the non-tradable sector, we can talk about so many different things from in terms of economics. But I want to sort of look at the social aspect of it. Do we really have an idea, you think, of the impact the COVID-19 has had on our economy? Is that something that you believe we truly understand as we even continue to ease our way out and to go through this situation for which this crisis for which we have found ourselves, David?
The answer to that is yes and no. And that's not a typical economist response. let me say that yes, we understand it anecdotally from what we encounter day to day. A number of us, as people indicate the problems that they're having or that are reported in the media and so on. No, in terms of hard data, and there was an article published a couple of weekends ago in which both Dr. Terence Farrell and Dr. Marlene Arts were interviewed, and they both indicated that there's no hard information about the exact number of people who are in poverty or who have fallen into very difficult, challenging circumstances because of the COVID situation, and also how many people have been reached by the government's social programs or by NGOs, faith-based organizations, and others. So, and this is a real problem. Now, that's why we had advocated more than a year ago that the government hire temporary people, OJTs if you want to call it that, young people coming out of school, universities, etc., who are unemployed, to to begin to map the place.
The social landscape, yes, and economics, yes.
Yeah, both in terms of having more labor inspectors, so as businesses open, they go around to make sure that people are covered by NIS and things like that, and also others who would be dealing with tax, making sure businesses are registered for tax purposes.
Yes.
But going into communities and identifying exactly what the problems are and so on. So that is a major area of weakness. There's a major gaps in terms of our information. But notwithstanding those gaps, the situation is real. Because if businesses are closed and virtually 75% of all businesses were shut down for 2-3 months this year, and they were shut down for 3 months last year, you would therefore know in general terms how many workers were employed in those sectors, and you would have an idea of what the wage rates are in those sectors, and therefore you would know that the vast majority of those workers in retail outlets, the service sector like restaurants and places like that, earn minimum wage or just above minimum wage, which really would not have given them enough savings to take them through a period of no money whatsoever. So you could work it out that there's great pain, and you also know as a fact that the government's delivery of the social programs, particularly the salary relief grants, has been very slow, and in some cases,
and sometimes non-existent.
Exactly. And that is horrendous, because you're dealing now with people who just don't have money. We're expecting to get a $1,500, which sounds small, but for them it would have been critical just to tide over. Lifesavers,
as we say,
And what that does, what we also learned from the COVID, if we didn't know it before, I mean, a number of us understood it before, but as you said in your opening remarks at the start of the program, it exposed the fault lines, it exposed the cracks in our system. It exposed the weaknesses and the gaps and the problems, both in terms of people's lives and in terms of what the economy does, because the economy really is supposed to produce goods and services to satisfy the needs of the people. And our economy was not doing that. And then our economy was also satisfying in an obscenely excessive way, not the needs, but the wants of a few. Right? So the few, and as our economic pie shrunk, because there's no doubt our economic pie shrunk because businesses were closed down, we were losing income even before COVID because of the oil and gas situation. As the pie shrunk, there were some who were keeping their size of the pie, their slice of the pie, the same size, which meant that more and more people had to share a smaller and smaller slice.
That widening gap between the haves and the haves not. Mr. George, let me just, I wanted to respond to that very same issue. I've raised the question many times about what really is the true or will be the true social cost to this global pandemic, COVID-19. Would we ever, get to a point where we can say, well, yes, we have been able to cushion the impact. We know that the government has been giving out grants and there've been loan facilities and what have you. But the true social cost, how do you see this? How do you measure what could possibly be the true social cost coming out of this pandemic?
Well, the thing is, it's the kind of thing that you will never be able to fully put a dollar value on or a number figure to. And I'll tell you why. And this is the follow-up on what David just said. Stephen, our office did a small Mother's Day hamper drive in Tobago for Mother's Day. And, we gave out 100 hampers. And we were oversubscribed by about 1,000 applicants. And I mean, see, when I tell you, when you read the stories and you recognize that there is a serious need.
Yes, indicative of the need. Yeah, social need.
That's right. That's the point. And so the thing is, I mean, as bad as it may have been before, I think that it has really, exacerbated the situation as a result of so many persons who either would have been on reduced income, no income, those who may be the main breadwinner of the family may have lost their jobs. So therefore, I think we really have to think of ways and means to ensure that this social safety net is put back in place for those with the greatest need, and forget about serving those with the greatest greed. Those who want to, get a $500,000 tax exemption to buy a luxury SUV Mercedes-Benz in this time. I mean, it is obscene. And, I was appalled that the Prime Minister sought to try to defend that. I was really appalled that he sought to try to defend that, in his press conference. That it's indefensible. You're buying an $800,000 or $900,000 Prado vehicle. I mean, come on, seriously? At times when persons don't even have food on their tables, it is not acceptable in any way at all. And I think that, the government ought to try to lead by example, and pointing fingers at the opposition is not the solution, because, it's like the Bible says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. So neither of them are blameless in this regard, So, I mean, as much as the opposition has been, stoking the fires of this issue, I mean, they are equally guilty of very much the same thing when they were in office. So at the end of the day, the only section of the society who is suffering is the small man out there. You have in a situation such as this, WASA embarked upon a disconnection drive for the most vulnerable in society. How could you justify such draconian measures? And then you're still talking about increased taxes and the burden. Let me tell you, the burden on the people out there is real, Stephen. Yes. And I really, really feel it for people, and I think that we have to be the voice for the voiceless in society. We have to use programs such as this to advocate against the greed and the obscenity that takes place in terms of those who are in a position of power and authority, who are abusing it to satisfy their greed and ignoring the general population and their need.
Well, I've heard the comment by one of the government ministers, I think it was the social development minister, that talked about, there's the needy and then there's the greedy. And I think that statement did not go down too well with a lot of people.
Well, it's in the context in which she used it, because to describe the general public in that manner, I think it was very insensitive.
Yes, and the minister did respond, and she said that it was taken out of context. So in all fairness to her, there was a response. And I think she went into explaining, in what context the statement was made. But be that as it may, I wanted to, as you touched on that point, and I'll go back to David after this. I want to just, continue on that very same trend there, Martin, and I'll ask David to respond to this on this very same business of need and poverty. The Prime Minister on his press conference appeared to have been bothered somewhat, and it's not quite often that you see a Prime Minister being flustered, because you have to keep a cool head being the leader of a country. And this is how the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, responded when he was approached. Well, one of the questions was posed to him on this very same issue of the country generally and the social aspects of Trinidad and Tobago.
EMBD fighting $3.8 billion in the court for you, because EMBD is your company, it's a state company. If we lose that battle, you have to pay. We have situations, contractors come in with certified claims and say, okay, I'll write off X hundred million, give me the rest. And the people who did that, still in the parliament, waiting for the next election and annoying me in the intervening period. You know what time I get up in the morning? I go to bed between 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and I get up at daybreak. And when I get up nervous many times, because what's going to happen to us as a people today? And all of a sudden they're concerned about debt in the country, they're concerned about who's hungry, they're concerned about who's starving, they're concerned just give me a break. Thank you very much.
David, an obviously bothered and emotional Prime Minister.
Yes, and the thing is that, and coming back to Martin's point, it's very important that in a time of crisis, the leadership demonstrates that they have the moral authority to lead and guide the country out of a crisis. And moral authority has to do as well with the examples that you set, both in terms of what you say. You could always claim afterwards it was and what you do, but you could always claim that it was said out of context. But you have to think very carefully about what you say and how you say it.
Yes.
Because the messages are going to be interpreted by people from where
especially the spin doctors. Yes.
Well, not only that, but if I am somebody who is catching my tail, I haven't had a job for 3 months, I don't have any money, and I lined up in the sun, as I saw personally people down at South Park that morning. And then you talk about greed. I'm going to get very upset and very angry because you're not standing in my shoes. And then when I hear subsequent to that about motor vehicle tax exemptions being still obtained and so on, I would boil over with anger. So you have to be careful about what you say and what you do. And as I said the other day, it's a matter of moral authority. So it's not a matter of whether you're legally entitled to it and so on. Yes, you're entitled to certain benefits from your job, but you don't have to take those benefits. They're not mandatory benefits. Yes, they're discretionary. They're discretionary. You don't have to buy a new motor car. You don't have to buy a new motor car. You know, there are other people who don't have money to buy taxi fare to try and find themselves to work on Monday. So so that is what moral leadership is about. And let me just add another dimension to the social crisis. The Ministry of Education made a very interesting statement about a week or two ago when they said at the start of the pandemic in last year, there were over 66,000, I think, children who did not have access to Wi-Fi or a device to access online learning, online classes. Now, 66,000 is a huge number of children. The even more disturbing figure was that in April of this year, a whole year afterwards, the ministry said there was still more than 30,000 children who didn't have access to either device or Wi-Fi or data. So what we have created in terms of the social cost is another missing generation. And unless we have a program of remedial education to catch up those 60,000 children.
Learning loss.
For the loss that they have, and many of them dropped out of school. If we don't do that, or even the 33,000 that still don't have devices, that is 33,000 children who might be 12, 14, 15, who in a few years' time are unemployable, without hope, and where do they turn? To a life of crime and violence. So then we would blame them, when in fact we should blame decisions that were made that discriminated against and disadvantaged them. We are creating our own problems in that regard, and that cost is not going to be known until 5, 6, 8 years from now.
Mr. George, just coming back to you, and I'm remembering as David was talking there, I'm remembering that famous song by I think it was Ella Andel, where she talked about the lost generation, and if we don't find them, they are going to find us. So on that very same point, and I've also I saw a report from the World Bank that talked about learning loss, even throughout this pandemic. So that when we talk about the social costs and the impact of what this pandemic has done, not just to Trinidad and Tobago, but many other economies of the world, it is a serious issue, and we probably need to sit down and do the necessary checks and maybe get a team combination of professors and economists and what have you to really give us a handle on where we are. But I'm sure from your viewpoint, Mr. George, you believe that even though I suspect that you are optimistic about us moving out of where we are, you still believe that we are far off from that.
Well, I mean, we're a long way off. And, Stephen, I think just that clip you played is so demonstrative of the root of the problem in Trinidad and Tobago. Instead of our leaders showing that level of maturity, sincerity, and authenticity What we always get is the constant backbiting and snapping at each other and pointing of fingers and, well, okay, we're doing it, but they did it also. And,
but isn't that the nature of the politics?
Well, no, George? It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. And I'll tell you why. You look around at other countries, say, for instance, even in the Caribbean, right? You look also even at Jamaica, where, I mean, their politics is really divided. But I'll tell you, on national issues, you are able to see Jamaicans say, hey, listen, we need to put Jamaica first, and that is what our politicians don't ever seem to be able to do. Present company accepted. I'm talking about the two major parties.
Yes. Otherwise, you might have got the pre-action protocol letter.
It's not directed to you, David, I'm sure.
That is the issue. So instead of saying, like, okay, look, hey, I will look at this and let's re-examine it. Maybe we erred, whatever. No, the instant automatic gut reaction is you point fingers at the other side, but they did it too, and and that's where the people,
the adversarial politics,
get trampled underfoot. It's like they will say, when elephants fighting, grass gets trampled. Well, we the people, we are the grass. And we're getting trampled all the time because that's all they do. They're best at fighting each other, pointing fingers at each other, calling names, throwing picong, digging up each other's skeletons and parading them, instead of focusing on the good of the people and what should obtain. I mean, look, even a simple thing like, for instance, the legislation for Tobago and the constitutional amendment.
Yes.
You saw how that degenerated into basically almost like a brawl of throwing words and what you did and what I did and and that's all they do. It's worse than children in a schoolyard.
Which, by the way, Mr. George, as you touched on that Tobago issue, I suspect that I've been hearing that might lapse based on the time frame. Just a bit of a tangent here.
Well, yes, not surprisingly. Not surprising.
So we may be back again.
They play this game every 4 or 5 years.
All right. David, let me bring you back in here, just to sort of continue on that point. The political banter. I mean, David, you sat in the parliament, and you would have had first-hand, up close, and we are saying that Martin is saying that, listen, it doesn't always have to be adversarial. Can we, as gentlemen, in what we call true Westminster style, discuss these issues without getting flustered, without bringing out the skeletons, David?
I mean, one can engage in heated debate in Parliament, and that is necessary, and hold a position. But I don't have it in front of me right now, but Eric Williams, in his address to the nation on Independence Day, spoke about what is democracy, and he was saying that it depends really on informed public opinion and an engaged civil society, which we now call civil society, and so on. I said the responsibility for that rests on political parties, not just members of Parliament. He said members of Parliament really represent people. In other words, they're supposed to represent their constituents. But what we have are members of Parliament who represent the party and see every action as being one that has to be taken, not in terms of the national interest or not to educate people, but rather to consolidate your base in order to win elections.
Party base, yes.
Yeah, party base in order to win elections. And given the ethnic nature of our electoral politics, that becomes very, very dangerous. And one of the things that I'm very concerned about is the rise in the comments, the nasty comments and so on that have been taking place on social media, not only around the pandemic but otherwise, which can lead us into a kind of ethnic conflagration
and further polarization.
Well, not as polarization, but worse than polarization, that we really do not want to go there. And and if we have that, there's absolutely no way, Stephen, that we are going to recover from this economic crisis and pandemic, because the country will be so divided that whatever government does, good, bad, or indifferent, will be rejected by the other 1/3 of the population.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go back to Mr. George. Mr. George, on the issue of the border closure and border opening, it was also announced that we would, we'd be having this big celebration, this launch, as it were, of the reopening of the borders. And I know that you've also been, championing the cause that we need to look for ways to fast track that opening. And the call has also, I've heard it from the Minister of Health and the ministry officials, and even the Prime Minister, saying that the borders will be open, yes, but in a controlled way. And he said that Tobago would not be that area where you would have a mass, influx of persons. Saying that Piarco would be more or less streamlined for that. But on the issue of border closure, I wanted to just get a listen to what the Prime Minister also said on that, and I'll have you respond to that, to which he remarked.
And some people are concerned about the fact that we kept the border closed in the beginning and now we're opening it when there are challenges outside. Well, the same challenge that exists now with the Delta virus outside is the same frightening challenge that existed with COVID-19 in the beginning, the first variant, the first microbe, because it was that level of a risk that we had to be taking. So in the beginning, we closed in response to what we knew then, and we had no vaccine, we had no vaccinated person, and we didn't have a body of data that tells us that this thing is not going to go away in September. It is more than likely that this virus would be attracting our attention for years to come. We are already being told by the scientists that revaccination is a possibility and a likelihood if we are going to remain healthy in the face of this virus.
Mr. George, the Prime Minister's rationale for doing what he did and doing what the government did with respect to border management, your response?
Well, the thing is, my point is, having closed the borders, and I mean, the fact is they are still closed at this point, I just find the timing a bit curious, in the sense that we haven't gotten to where we ought to be with vaccinations. So I would have thought that the government would have waited. So if it's going to take a month or two, I mean, nobody's going to die because the borders are closed. So if it's going to take a month or two more, I would have thought that we would have waited until we got our vaccination up to the level of the herd immunity. I mean, if we have 800,000 Sinopharm vaccinations coming in, that hopefully should be about 400,000 persons to add to what I have heard the government say to be at least 100,000 persons. So therefore, in those circumstances, I would have thought that, you would wait until you get to that level before reopening the borders. And then once you are at that level, then I would think that you'd also be able to say, well, look, we are lifting the state of emergency, we are lifting the curfew, and we are reopening businesses fully. So in other words, it just appears to be a bit of a hasty decision, and I'm not sure what exactly prompted it, but the dots don't connect with the greatest of respect. And I say this with the greatest of deference because, I mean, I always am willing to give governments credit to say that they are maybe privy to information that we, the peasantry, are not aware of, so therefore, they may know things that in their wisdom, wisdom,
yes, okay.
But the point is, if it is that there is some logic that the Prime Minister could present, I'll be happy to see it. But thus far, I remain a bit unconvinced as to the rationale for this July 17th date. I don't know if it is that somebody had a dream or a vision or something of the sort. But given the fact that you were supposed to have so many vaccines coming in shortly, the question is, why not wait and do it properly?
Okay,
That's
all right. So, all right. So you're questioning the logistics where that is concerned, and
yes, I am because they've been closed for so long. So I mean, what's the haste for July 17th? What's the magic number about July 17th? You know that's your date for reopening when you're saying vaccines are coming in abundance. So let's wait a month or two again. Get everybody vaccinated, and then you open everything fully in a proper way.
All right, and you're listening to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and we are discussing the topic this evening, Trinidad and Tobago, pathway to economic reopening and recovery. I have with me Mr. David Abdullah, leader of the Movement for Social Justice and a former government senator. Also Mr. Martin George, attorney at law and president of the Tobago Business Chamber. Gentlemen, we are almost to the end of the program for this evening, and in the closing moments, I want if you can each give some closing remarks as we wrap up in executive summary form, as it were. Based on the topic this evening, as we looked at the country, a pathway to economic recovery, reopening, and recovery. Let me just allow Mr. George just to have your closing remarks as we end the program shortly on this very important topic.
Now, what I would say, Stephen, and I'd say to the nation that we are fully aware and cognizant of the challenges and the fact that this is unknown territory that the government is in.
Uncharted waters, yes.
Trying to manage, uncharted waters in terms of trying to manage this COVID-19 crisis. And we offer our support and our encouragement to the government all along. But that does not mean that persons from civil society groups, from different agencies, different sectors of society cannot raise valid, legitimate, and respectful questions as to, okay, what is the logical rationale? Show me the data, show me the facts, show me, your figures to justify these decisions. Because, we ought to be able to have that type of mature, rational discussion and to make that type of inquiry and to get proper answers rather than
and not be vilified,
treated as if, you're against the government.
Mischief makers, yes, I've heard it.
That's right. It's not necessarily that persons are mischief makers. They may have legitimate inquiries and valid questions that they're asking, and if they're asking for you to show the data and the facts to support your decisions, then I think they are very well in their rights to do so. I think we ought to be more mature than that. We ought to not be so thin-skinned and view legitimate questioning of your policies as an attack against the government and try to paint it in a political light.
All right. David, your closing remarks. And I know that you're not thin-skinned. So that doesn't apply. I mean, you've seen many things, you've heard many things, and just some closing remarks, David.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen. Let me just say that what we need in terms of recovery and reopening is also transformation. What we have right now is more gain for the few and more pain for the many, and we have to change that arrangement. Yes. And there's a very important report that just came out from the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. I want to just, if I have a minute, just to quote part of it, because I think this is central to what we have to do. The document is titled, "The Recovery Paradox in Latin America and the Caribbean. Growth amid persistent structural problems, inequality, poverty, low investment and productivity." And it says, and I'm quoting, "We need policies for a transformative recovery with an emphasis on investment, industrial policies, and technologies to drive growth in sectors that are more technology intensive and generate quality jobs, restructure health and education systems, sustain the transfers, universalize basic emergency income, implement bonds to fight hunger, ensure access to a basic digital basket, strengthen support for micro, small, and medium enterprises, push cross-cutting and sectoral policies to move towards a new model of development." It goes on to talk about fiscal space, which is government revenue and expenditure, must increase through growth in tax revenue and reduction of unnecessary expenses. We must also consolidate income taxes, extend the reach of property and wealth taxes, review and update progressively the royalties drawn from the exploitation of non-renewable resources, and consider taxes on the digital and environmental economy, and so on, and those related to public health. Now, that is the kind of approach that we have to engage in. We don't want to build back better. We don't want to build back a system better and make it a better system where the few benefit and the many suffer. We need to have a new type of transformed economic, social, and political relations of power in the country.
All right, and gentlemen, thank you both for sitting with us, and of course, we always would want to have the continuance, to continue the discussion at another time. Mr. George, thank you again, and
it's always a pleasure. And listening to David's closing comments, it sounds like he was advocating that there should be a movement for social justice. But of course,
Martin, you and I will talk off air about your involvement in that process.
Gentlemen, thank you again. We have to leave it at the moment. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. And have a very good evening, everyone.
Welcome. Yeah. And this is the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings with you, and we had in the last hour two persons sitting in with us, and we were talking Trinidad and Tobago pathway to economic reopening and recovery. Mr. David Abdullah, a leader of the Movement for Social Justice and former government senator, as well as Mr. Martin George, attorney at law and president of the Tobago Business Chamber. So until the next program, I'm Stephen Cummings. See you next Wednesday. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.
The best protection program. We have had complainants wanting protection to give information about a police officer because they fear for their life.
But Mr. Cummings, I think you hit the nail on the head a little while ago, because with the COVID and with the pandemic, it has caused a lot of institutions to treat with the way you deal with business in a more efficient way.
Let's discuss the issues. Let's dialogue towards developing a deeper understanding, fostering an atmosphere of peace, all towards creating better, stronger families and communities. Right here on Isaac 98.1 FM, every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m. The Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
24/7. We're right here for you. Isaac, the promise. Always number one for the family.
Is there not a cause? ITNAC is inviting you to tune into the program